folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and you are watching The Nerdy Grail. Now, I know in my last video I did state that it was going to be the last video for a couple of days due to the Christmas celebrations, but I had completely forgotten about something that was happening late last night. At 9 o'clock on BBC4, they played the War Games in colour. So a little while ago I did a video talking about these colorizations and whether I think or not they are good, and I was saying we'd have to wait and see what happens with the War Games. Well, the War Games dropped last night, where it reduced a 4-hour 10-part epic story down to a 1-hour 30-minute epic story. And I'm here in this video to discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and what do I think overall. Because if I'm being honest, it was a very, very mixed bag, and there is some potential controversial stuff in this that changes even more lore and more history to Doctor Who, if what I saw in that episode turns out to be true. So let's just break this down a little bit. So firstly, let's talk about the positives, the negatives, and then I'll give my overall thoughts. So let's start with the positives of the War Games in colour. Well, as I mentioned previously in my colorization video, one of the positives for the War Games in colour is the fact that it's in colour. You know, the colorization of the War Games was beautiful. I actually think the colorization in this story was actually even better than the colorization that we got in the Daleks. So it shows that they have improved. It was really, really good, really, really solid. The colours popped on all those outfits. It was great seeing Jamie, you know, in his Highland gear with his kilt and all, in full colour. It was brilliant. Patrick Troughton's costume, brilliant in colour. He looked fab. You know, all the colours for all the World War I outfits, you know, the Roman outfits, the American Civil War outfits. It was brilliant. And the colours that they used when in the base for the War Chief and the Warlord and all, it was really, really good. It popped, the reds, the silvers. God, it was gorgeous. I loved it. So that was definitely a positive. And I knew that was going to be a positive because, you know, they're brilliant in black and white, so they're going to be great in colour as well. And there's nothing really in that story for the colour to ruin. So, yeah, that's a big one up. The colour was brilliant. Another positive was, unlike the Daleks, where there was a lot of editing in the Daleks to where it didn't make sense, but also it made stories feel a bit too jumpy. This time the editing felt more natural. It worked a lot better. There was a couple of scenes where I did think that jump felt a bit off, but it wasn't too bad. And they didn't have like those silly flashbacks. I think they had like 1 or 2 little half flashbacks, but it was a lot better this time round. So I'm glad they improved upon that, because that was one of the big negatives for the Daleks in colour. Those flashbacks were silly. So it was really, really good that they didn't implement that this time. So it made the story feel a bit more natural and flow. So I really, really appreciated that as well. Thought that was good. And I thought, well, the stuff that they cut out, yeah, they actually cut out some the right parts as well. There were certain characters who pretty much got all their scenes cut, but overall it worked quite well for the story. So they managed to find a fairly natural, smooth way of doing a 10-part story and narrowing it down to the length of about a 4-part story. So that was really, really good. I must give them props for that. And I will also say as well, in the brand new regeneration scene for Patrick Troughton, I have actually already seen that, because that was partially taken from an online source. But it did look really good, and it did flow quite naturally into the story itself as well. It was really, really good to see. You saw the second Doctor sort of fade away. He gets put back into the TARDIS and he's travelling down to Earth. They have updated some of the effects from the online version of that. They even included some of the meteorites at the end falling to Earth to show you the transition into Spearhead from space. And I thought that was really quite nice as well, to be honest. But yeah, then they implemented the Jon Pertwee scene, which was really, really nice. So you got to see and hear Jon Pertwee. So it gave you a bit of a natural, smooth transition from Troutman to Pertwee, so that for some fans there's actually an on-screen transition, because in the original, obviously, you don't actually see Patrick Troughton regenerate into Jon Pertwee. So that was quite nice. And some of the effects that we used, even though they didn't update the effects very much, most of the effects was like the Time Lord's eyes would glow yellow when they were trying to use their powers. And the effects of the new base as well, that the War Chief and the Warlord and all resided in, looked really, really cool. And it looked really, really good, to be fair. Obviously, it's a bit jarring thinking that's supposed to be the 1960s, really, in terms of when this episode was made. But it's what it is. It's a bit of fun. So I'd say overall, yeah, that was pretty good. However, now that I've talked about the positives, I am going to have to now talk about the negatives. And the negatives also come into my concerns with potential law changes and controversial law changes at that. So my first negative is, firstly, before I talk about the law changes, I'm going to talk about the music. The music really bothered me in the War Games. It really bothered me. Now, I sat and watched this with my family, and we all said the same thing, and I said the same thing last year with the Daleks. The music is too loud. They turned the music up way too loud, so there was lots of scenes where you could not hear what was going on, and that really frustrates me. I don't mind you putting new music in, but you don't have to crank it up to volume 100 so that you drown out your actors and actresses. Turn it down, please. It was absolutely ridiculous. I couldn't hear what was going on for most of it, and it was just ridiculous. And the music choices were fine. It wasn't like they were out of place, but it was just too loud. Far too loud, and that happened in the Daleks as well. So that was a big disappointment. But then, yeah, if we're going to now get into some of this potential law changes and controversial stuff that I know everyone's in their reviews is going to be talking about, what am I talking about? Well, firstly, I'll talk about the smaller one. During the regeneration scene, which again, I loved that they included the online video, showing Patrick Troughton into Jon Pertwee, good, giving some credit there, because that was a beautiful scene. But I'm talking about before that even happens. When the Time Lord sentenced the Doctor to exile and say he's got to change his appearance, they give him obviously the options, what he wants to look like. And in the original, it was like some random people, like an old man, a skinny man, that sort of thing. But they've got this thing with the remake, with any remakes, whether it's through the animations or through the colorizations, of implementing new Who stuff into this, which is too jarring and just shouldn't happen. So when Troughton looks at the screen, for like, it's too old, he's too fat, he's too skinny. For too old, they use the 12th Doctor, they use Peter Capaldi, they use Jodie Whittaker, they use David Tennant. They use Matt Smith. I didn't like that, if I'm being perfectly honest. Sure, okay, it's a nice nod, and some of the new Who fans in particular would love that. For me, it's too jarring and just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense, and it's silly. Because the Doctor now has seen his future incarnations, and I know you've got the thing of, well, he'd probably forget once he's regenerated so many times, and it affects his mind and all that, but I just don't like it. So I didn't appreciate or didn't like that at all. I'm sorry. And I love Peter Capaldi and some of the other new Who actors, but just no, it's too much for me. It's a bit like how in the Faceless Ones animation, they implemented pictures of the Master, both Roger Delgado and Sacha Dhawan even. It was weird. But speaking of the Master, the biggest potential controversial law change, and I thought this to myself because they did it via music, and there was also a scene towards the end. They are trying to say, or potentially trying to say here, that the War Chief is actually an earlier incarnation of the Master, before Roger Delgado. Now, I'm not sure what I think of that or not. I think that is potentially dangerous play here. Because we sort of, back when the War Games came out and I watched Doctor Who, and I hadn't seen an awful lot of it, I did personally think it was a bit weird. You got another person who's a Time Lord who knows all, he says he knows the Doctor, You know, and it is quite funny how then only a season later the Master then knows about being exiled on Earth and is then, you know, tormenting the Earth constantly in the Jon Pertwee era. But yeah, they're trying to say that the War Chief is the Master. The reason why this is the case, and I think they are going down that route, is for two reasons. Firstly, every time the War Chief was having a proper deep conversation with the Doctor, they started playing they played both like classic series Master music, but they also played the knock four times, the tap four times, the da 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 da. Every single time they were talking about something like major or like world ending, and I'm like, oh my god, why are they doing that? Are they trying to say that that's the Master? Or I remember at the time watching it thinking that's going to confuse people and thinking that he's the Master, but he's not the Master. And it's like, so they played that all the time, and I thought, oh my goodness, are they really going down that route? So but not only that, then the ceiling factor for me, the proper ceiling factor where they could be trying to set that up, is the fact that at the end of the story, the War Chief does get killed by the Warlord and all his guards. He gets shot. And he says, like, well, I'll take the body away, you know, we don't want to see that. And they start taking away. And in the back, if you listen carefully, it's lucky that some of the sound effects are turned right up. If you listen real carefully, you can hear regeneration sound effects. You can hear a regeneration happening, but then they don't show his face. They just show him lying on the floor. They're trying to imply there that he's regenerated and he's possibly regenerated into Roger Delgado. So I really don't know how I feel about that. And so that's a negative for me because I don't know. I don't think there was any real need for it. We're allowed other Time Lords, okay? There's not just the Master and the Rani, even though we don't seem to get the Rani no matter how many times we ask for her. But there's more than just the Master, people. We had the meddling monk. You could have, if you wanted to be a thing, it could let that be the meddling monk. I don't know why they had to do that, because that's right up the meddling monk's alley. You know, trying to meddle with different time periods and stuff. So I just don't get it. Don't get what the obsession is with the Master. I like the Master, don't get me wrong, but he's getting used far, far too much now lately, and it's really annoying at this point. So yeah, I'm really not sure what to think about that. So yeah, that's sort of my negatives. The potential lore changes that didn't need to happen, and the music again, they just can't seem to get that right. So if they do another colorization, please just turn the music down. It's ridiculous at this point. Sorry, I feel like I've gone on a bit of a rant there. Started to get a little bit more agitated. But let's just give you my final thoughts on the War Games in colour, whether it was needed, and is it better than the Daleks in colour? Because that's the core thing. Overall, I thought the War Games in colour was a decent story. Okay, I will give it that. It was decent and is a decent replacement for the original, even though, in my opinion, you can't beat the original. I don't care that it's 4 hours long. I will happily watch that 4 hour story. It's a brilliant story. So I was a little gutted at some of the things that were cut out. But for new fans or fans who want a quick version of it, there's nothing really wrong with it. It can count as a suitable replacement for the War Games. So yeah, I'd say overall it's a decent story. The colorization is beautiful. You know, some of the visual effects, the fact that they gave credit and used that made regeneration for Patrick Troughton and Jon Pertwee is brilliant, and I love that because I always wondered if anything like that was going to be used. So it was brilliant. So I loved all that, you know, and the music, even though it was too loud, there was good choices there, you know, and the editing was not as bad as the Daleks. So is it better than the Daleks in colour? I would say personally, if I want to mentally take out the potential lore changes out of it, I would say yeah, I actually did enjoy the War Games in colour more than the Daleks, because the Daleks had really bad editing, the music obviously being too loud. They cut a lot of my favourite scenes or ruined them through the loud music and editing. So yeah, I would say the War Games in colour is better than the Daleks in colour, in my personal opinion. But yeah, are these colorizations necessary? Now that I've seen the War Games, I would say I can see why they're doing them. But for me, I just would personally want to keep the originals. You know, just colorize the originals, you know? So have the War Games 4 hours version in color. But hey, it is what it is. But yeah, that is going to be my review of the War Games in colour. I know I did say that I wasn't going to be doing a video for a couple of days, but now I actually won't be. I had to talk about the War Games in colour. As a Whovian, I had to discuss it. But yes, there is going to be a little bit of a break now from videos for at least the next 2 or 3 days. So I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. If you did like this video, please like it by giving it a thumbs up. Comment down below. What do you think of the War Games in colour? Did you watch it? And what do you think of those potential lore changes as well? The War Chief being the Master? I'm very unsure about this. It's a potential, but I don't know. But yeah, and subscribe if you're new. But for now, this is the Nerdy Grail signing off. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you all next time. Bye for now, everyone.